as expensive. You don't need the fineries as some others do. In fact, most men, this is the sad note, most men, most fathers, the first time they receive flowers is at their funerals. Yeah. The most time men receive flowers is at their funeral, and they can't even hold a smell of them then. But, and we're not as precise as the ladies are. We strong, we big, and we hit. But we take the less care. And as an extension to that, I must not forget the person that informed and inspired this day, Dr. King, that you all are also honoring, was a battle axe. Every generation has a battle axe that is sent to cut down the walls of division, the walls of separation, the walls of hatred, the walls of even racism that has unfortunately become pervasive in our society. This Juneteenth, 157 years from emancipation. This, though, is the first holiday paid in the history of this country for Juneteenth. Amen. This, unfortunately, has taken 157 years. And I'm used to pastoring in Oklahoma. What people really don't also know is that the Juneteenth is when they celebrate the reading of the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed in 1863. But it wasn't received by the slaves in Texas until 1865. In Alabama, we celebrate May Day celebration because that's when we first received our news. I'm from Tuskegee, Macon, Bullitt County area. Why did it take 2 years for that news to travel? Why? Because when Abraham Lincoln signed it, he signed it, and if you read it, the Emancipation Proclamation was to free slaves that were in states rebelling against the U.S. So states that weren't rebelling, like where I live now in Maryland, they kept their slaves. But in states like Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, he was making, how can you make slaves free in a state that doesn't even recognize your leadership? So it didn't free them up until 1865. And because slaves were owned then more than just by white people, Native Americans owned slaves. And some of those tribes kept their slaves a year longer. A lot of folks don't know that. And on top of that, when the slaves were finally emancipated, what's the first thing that happened? The black codes were written. Vagrancy laws were implemented, criminalizing black life. So the slaves went from emancipation to incarceration. Don't take my word for it. In 1850, in Alabama, the incarceration population was 98% white. In 1850, in Alabama, the incarceration demographic was 98% white. In 1880, the demographics of those who were incarcerated in 1880 was 85% black. How can you explain such a massive growth in the incarceration rates of black people? Because in the 13th Amendment that really freed and effectively ended chattel slavery in America, it left out a loophole. And that loophole was the slaves are free except for as a punishment of a crime. So what happened? They started punishing us for crimes. Crimes that they just created. It was a crime in 1880 to be unemployed in the South. And guess what? The only place that were hiring black folk? The sharecroppers. It was a crime to associate with somebody who was not employed. It was a crime. Where do you think these trespassing and loitering laws came from? Somebody turn my microphone down. But their genesis, that's all right, their genesis began after slavery. Because we had to keep the black man and woman on the plantation. And guess what? They leased them out to developers. They called it convict leasing. Don't take my word for it. Type it in Google right now. Convict leasing. And that lasted up until the end of World War II. And we needed us to fight in their wars. And we fought every war America has had. Every war America has had. We have been on the front line. The first person to die for this nation, Crispus Attucks, for African American. Every single war, including the Civil War, my great-great-grandfather, Allen Birdsong, in Tennessee, fought for the Union Army in Tennessee, believe it or not. And when we fought in World War I, came back in 1919, we had our heads high, we had our uniforms on, and we had just come back, and we had left our wives and our children who had created black enterprises all over the country, in places like Tulsa and East St. Louis and all over the world, all over this country. Had our own black Wall Streets, not just in Tulsa. That was the biggest, but not just in Tulsa. And speaking of Tulsa, I'm going there in a few hours. It was the most prosperous place for black people in the country, where over 10,000 black people lived and over 6 families owned their own airplanes. In 1921, when you good to have an automobile, I can't tell you a place today with 10,000 black folk and 6 of them own their own airplanes. But in Tulsa, it was the norm. This was before any governmental self-help program. This was before any philanthropic grant that came through. This was before anything. This was surely a generation out of slavery, inspired by their faith in God and their ambition. When it was against the law for black folks to know how to read or write, we had lawyers and doctors, dentists, nurses, business owners. And what happened? What happened to that? It was destroyed by racism. Burned to the ground. The first time airplanes were used to drop bombs on American soil, not Pearl Harbor, 1942, not 9/11, 2001, but happened right here in America. And the first victims of that aerial terrorism were black folks. And the first perpetrators of that were racist white men and women who got private airplanes and dropped bombs on Americans. And guess what? After 9/11, I wanted to join the military. I was a student at the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, and I wanted to join the military. That day, I wasn't alive in Pearl Harbor, but I probably would have wanted to then too. We went to Japan and dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima after Pearl Harbor. We went to Afghanistan and we killed Saddam Hussein, we killed Osama bin Laden and his children. We just left Afghanistan a couple of days ago. But for the very first act of aerial terrorism, not even one person went to jail. Not one. The police deputized members of the white mob in Tulsa. The National Guard would watch them load black bodies on rail cars and dump them in mass graves that still where they lie today. Never had a small mortuary embalm the body. Never was read their last rites. And they still lie. So when God sent me to Tulsa, I didn't know why, didn't know the purpose, but God used me to shed light on that. And God led me to go out to City Hall and make protest of that. And now 4 years later, what was not known is nationally known. And now 4 years later, we have a mass grave excavation committee that I sit on. And 4 years later, we have a lawsuit that I was the first plaintiff that started it as a pastor of Vernon. One person. I wasn't from there. I wasn't from Mobile either when I was here. But one person. The reason why you all have this holiday today, one person named Opal Lee, retired teacher in Texas, marched every year 2.5 miles. Why? Because it took 2.5 years for the news to travel from D.C. to Texas to inform the slaves that they were free. Opal Lee, she's 95 now, was 94 when she started this push. 94 when she got the bill passed. 94 years of age. She retired as a teacher at 74. She has been protesting to have Juneteenth for 20 years. One lady. From 74 to 94. And now we all have a day off. And most of you didn't know her name. One person, Margarita always says it doesn't take a whole lot of folks to do anything. Just a small, dedicated few. One person in your family decided to go to college and change the trajectory of your life. One person started a business and created generational wealth that you and your children cannot take benefit from. One person, I'm from Tuskegee, where they had a syphilis study. One person leaked it to the Washington Post. Well, they knew, they said how the U.S. government from 1932 to 1972 was watching black men suffer from syphilis just to study the effects on their body. No one the penicillin come out to kill. That happened in America, in Alabama. And one person leaked it. They tried to deny it, they tried to lie about it, but it ended that syphilis study. The power and impact of one battle axe. One battle axe. One can chase 1,000, the Bible says. Do you know how powerful you are? The best battle axes must first of all be sanctified. Sanctified is another word for being separate, to be set apart. You have to be set apart. You have to do things that other folks don't do. You have to wake up early. You have to leave your children and your wife on Father's Day to come and speak and inspire others. You have to stay long nights and travel far and wide to speak to places and help people register to vote. One person has to at least be willing to be set apart. You cannot hang out with chickens and fly with eagles. You must be sanctified. You must be set apart. And after you've been set apart for the work, you must be sent through the fire. Metal has to be sent through the fire. You have to go through, any blacksmith will tell you to get the right kind of steel. Mobile, I don't have to tell you about steel. You all tell the world about steel. But in order to have real pure steel, before you have the big factory that you all have today, you have to put it in a boiling furnace. And how the old blacksmith would know that the steel was clean and purified is that they could see their reflection in the fire. They can see the reflection in the metal. I'm going somewhere with this. There are times in your life when you have been put in the fire and you have been taken out of the fire, and you sometimes go back in the fire, and it is because God is trying to see his reflection in you, and you will continue to be put in the furnace of life, and God will take you out to show you who you are and to see who you are. And when God finally sees himself in you, y'all don't hear me, the reason why you have went through what you have gone through in your life is not because God is trying to burn you. God is trying to bless you and to help you become more in his image. So when he sends you through the fire, you don't say, Lord, get me out of this. You say, Lord, show me in my life. Show up in my life and allow me to resemble you. God wants to be able to look at you, and other folks look at you, and when they see you, they don't even see you. They see him inside of you. You ought to talk like God. You ought to walk like
You ought to smell like you come from a furnace, not just on Sunday, but every day. And the last thing a good battle axe has is that it is sharp. It is sharp. It studies. And you have to stay sharp in order to cut. You have to stay sharp. Read and understand. You ought not just finding out about Juneteenth today. You ought not be finding out for the first time about the Simply Study today. You ought not be just finding out about Tulsa Black Wall Street today. Study. I know they're trying to criminalize critical race theory, but one thing they cannot criminalize is American history. And this is not a theory. This is history. What happened is the kidnapping innocent people from Africa, transporting them through the Middle Passage and enslaving them for 400 years. Women and children molested and raped and sold off to the highest bidder. It is not a theory. It has happened. It happened right here in America. And when they got free, as Frederick Douglass said, they were free to famine. They were free to starve. They never got what they were promised by General Sherman in Savannah, Georgia. For Sherman Field number 15, there are 40 acres of a mule. The government promised those people that. They promised our black leaders that. And they said, when you go to the coast of the Carolinas, well, Hilton here is there when you vacation. He said, we will meet you with a mule. When Abraham Lincoln got assassinated, Andrew Johnson came in, he reversed the order, and Secretary of War Stanton was shocked and flabbergasted because they had given the freed slaves their word that they will be taken care of in America. And she takes care of every other nation, every other people. We just pledged $5.8 billion for Ukraine, but not a penny for our pain. Why is it when it comes to Black America gets constipated? You can let it flow right. Everything else, they have diarrhea for everybody else. It just keeps flowing out. But when it comes to giving us our blessing, America gets constipated. Well, I'm here today. We got some laxatives in the house. We got some Pepto-Bismol balls in the house. We got a friend anymore. We are demanding what we are owed. Juneteenth without justice is a mockery. And reparations not tomorrow, not next year, but now. If you can pay it to Japanese Americans, and I agree, after World War II, you ought to be able to pay it for us. We pay it to the Jewish Americans, and I agree, after the Holocaust. We pay it to Native Americans, and I agree. But what about African Americans who built this nation, and we have never received anything? And don't lecture me about affirmative action, because white women get more benefits from that than we do. Don't lecture me about welfare, because we don't get the benefits of that either. Don't lecture me about governmental housing, because that's a trap. When you created the ghetto, now you supervise the ghetto to put more people in incarceration, to keep us from our emancipation. God bless you, God keep you, and the grace of God watch over you, and the last word before I go, the last thing is you got to be still. You got to have it all over you. When you are a battle axe, the people in Russia have to have all over it. And we just have Pentecost. Pentecost celebrates the Holy Ghost. All represents the Holy Ghost. Is there anybody here? If you want to be a battle axe for God, you got to have the Holy Ghost. If you know you need a racial profile, you got to have the Holy Ghost. If you know you were the last time, at the first time, you got to have the Holy Ghost. When you know they're bombing our churches, you got to have the Holy Ghost to keep from going crazy. Be a battle axe unto God. You are his weapon of war. God bless you.